The sun-drenched plains of Nebraska stretched endlessly beneath the vast blue sky. As Sophia Fairchild clutched her weathered leather satchel and fought back tears, the dust from the stagecoach still settling around her boots as she gazed upon the town of Kearney for the first time in her 18 years of life. It was 1875, and the bustling frontier town represented both her deepest shame and her only hope. The weight of her father's final words pressed against her chest like a physical burden. "You've brought nothing but dishonor to our name," he had thundered, his face contorted with rage as he cast her out from their Boston home. "You are no longer a Fairchild." The memory of her mother's silent tears cut deeper than her father's wrath. Neither had moved to stop her when she'd packed her meager belongings. The scandal of being caught in an embrace with the gardener's son had been enough to sever 18 years of familial bonds. Sophia adjusted her worn bonnet, squinting at the dusty Main Street before her. Kearney was nothing like Boston Rower. Younger, alive with a kind of desperate energy she had never experienced in the polished drawing rooms of her past life. Freight wagons rumbled past, cowboys whooped as they rode through town, and everywhere she looked, people were building something from nothing. The town had been her desperate choice after finding an old letter from her mother's cousin who had moved west years ago. Whether Martha Fleming still resided in Kearney remained to be seen, but Sophia had nowhere else to turn. "Best move along, miss," the stagecoach driver called out, already unloading trunks belonging to other passengers. "Standing there won't make this place any prettier." Sophia nodded, gathering her courage as she stepped into the cacophony of Kearney's Main Street. Her practical shoes, the only pair she owned, now clicked against the wooden sidewalk as she made her way toward the general store. If anyone would know of Martha Fleming's whereabouts, it would be the proprietor of such an establishment. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and the comforting smell of coffee, leather, and dried goods enveloped her. A round-faced man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from behind the counter. "Good afternoon, miss. What can I help you with today?" Sophia cleared her throat. "I'm looking for a woman named Martha Fleming. I believe she's resided in Kearney for some time." The shopkeeper's face fell. "I'm afraid Martha passed on last winter. The influenza took her and half a dozen others." The room seemed to tilt beneath Sophia's feet, her last hope extinguished before she'd even had a chance to kindle it. "I see," she managed. "Thank you for the information. Were you family?" The man asked kindly. "Yes, she was my mother's cousin. I had hoped to stay with her." Sophia fought to maintain her composure. "I don't suppose you know if she had any other relations in town." The shopkeeper shook his head. "She lived alone, poor soul, left her little house to the church." Sophia thanked him again and stepped back onto the street, the reality of her situation crushing down on her. Her small purse contained barely enough money for a week's lodging. After that, she had no prospects, no connections, and no skills beyond those of a proper Boston lady, skills that held little currency in a frontier town. As she stood contemplating her fate, a commotion erupted further down the street. A man on horseback galloped past, nearly knocking her down. Behind him, a young child darted into the road, chasing after a bouncing ball. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Another rider rounded the corner at full speed, on a collision course with the child. Without thinking, Sophia dropped her satchel and lunged forward, scooping the little girl into her arms and tumbling to the side of the road as the horse thundered past. "Emma!" a deep voice called out, panic evident in its tone. A tall man with broad shoulders vaulted from his horse and rushed toward them. Sophia sat up, the child still clutched against her chest. The little girl couldn't have been more than 4 years old, with golden curls and tear-filled blue eyes. "Are you hurt?" Sophia asked, examining the child for injuries. "No, madam," the girl replied in a small voice. The man dropped to his knees beside them, his weathered face tight with concern. "Emma, what have I told you about running into the street?" His voice was stern but trembling with relief. "I'm sorry, Pa," the child whispered. The man turned his attention to Sophia, his eyes a startling shade of green meeting hers. "I can't thank you enough, miss. If you hadn't been there—" He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Anyone would have done the same," Sophia replied, attempting to stand while maintaining her dignity despite the dust covering her skirts. The man rose and offered his hand. "Patrick Thompson," he said, "and this is my daughter, Emma." Sophia hesitated before taking his hand. "Sophia Fairchild." "You're new to Kearney," he observed, not a question but a statement. "Yes," she admitted. "I arrived on the afternoon coach." Patrick Thompson studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He was perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His clothes were practical worn boots, canvas pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "You have family here?" he asked. "I had hoped to stay with a relative, but I've just learned she passed away last winter." Martha Fleming was her name. Recognition flickered across his face. "Martha was a kind woman, helped deliver Emma when my wife—" He glanced down at his daughter, who was now clinging to his leg. "When Emma's mother died bringing her into this world." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when Emma tugged at her father's hand. "I'm hungry, Pa." Patrick Thompson looked down at his daughter, then back at Sophia. A decision seemed to form in his eyes. "Miss Fairchild, might I offer you a meal as thanks for saving my daughter? It's the least I can do." Sophia hesitated. In Boston, accepting such an invitation from a stranger would have been unthinkable. But this wasn't Boston, and her options were rapidly diminishing. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Thompson." "Patrick," he corrected, then gestured toward a modest eating establishment across the street. "Widow Jensen serves the best stew in Nebraska." As they crossed the dusty thoroughfare, Sophia couldn't help but notice how people nodded respectfully to Patrick Thompson. He was clearly well regarded in Kearney. The restaurant was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the aroma of fresh baked bread permeating the air. A stout woman with gray streaked hair bustled over as they entered. "Patrick Thompson, and little Emma too, what brings you into town on a Tuesday?" Her eyes shifted to Sophia, curiosity evident. "Mrs. Jensen, this is Miss Fairchild." She just saved Emma from being trampled by Bill Reed's unruly stallion. Mrs. Jensen's eyebrows shot up as she ushered them to a table. "Land sakes! Well, you'll be wanting my venison stew then. On the house for the town hero." Before Sophia could protest, the woman had disappeared into the kitchen. She found herself seated across from Patrick Thompson, with Emma climbing onto the bench beside her father. "Mrs. Jensen exaggerates," Sophia said, uncomfortable with the attention. "Not by much," Patrick replied, his expression serious. "Bill Reed rides like the devil's on his heels, and that stallion of his has thrown better cowboys than him." A waitress arrived with glasses of water and a mug of milk for Emma. As the child sipped her drink, Patrick leaned forward slightly. "If you don't mind my asking, what brings a Boston lady to Kearney, Nebraska?" At her surprised look, he added, "Your accent. It's not difficult to place." Sophia considered how much to reveal. "My circumstances changed rather suddenly. Martha Fleming was my last connection to family." Patrick seemed to understand she was not offering the complete story. "Kearney's a growing town. There might be opportunities for someone like yourself." What sort of opportunities would those be, Mr. Thompson? I'm afraid my accomplishments include watercolor painting, piano playing, and needlepoint, none of which seem particularly valuable in a frontier town. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You'd be surprised. There's a hunger for refinement even here. Several of the merchant families have daughters who could benefit from such instruction. Before Sophia could respond, Mrs. Jensen returned with 3 steaming bowls of stew and a basket of bread. The aroma made Sophia's stomach growl embarrassingly. She hadn't eaten since a meager breakfast on the stagecoach. Eat up, the older woman encouraged. You're too thin by half. As they ate, Emma's shyness gradually melted away and she began chattering about her pony and the chickens at home. Sophia found herself charmed by the child's innocent enthusiasm. You live in town, Mr. Thompson? Sophia asked between bites of the hearty stew. Patrick, he reminded her again. And no, I have a cattle ranch about 5 miles east of here. Nothing grand like the big Texas spreads, but it's growing. Pa has the best horses, Emma declared proudly. And Aunt Mabel says I'm getting too big for her to chase after all day. Patrick gave his daughter an indulgent smile. Mabel is my housekeeper, though she's getting on in years now. Emma keeps her running from sunup to sundown. Something in his tone suggested an idea forming, but he said nothing more as they finished their meal. When the last of the bread had been used to soak up the rich gravy, Patrick wiped his mouth and regarded Sophia thoughtfully. Miss Fairchild, I might have a proposition for you, if you're willing to hear it. Sophia tensed, immediately wary. She had heard stories of vulnerable young women being lured into compromising situations. But looking at Emma's innocent face and the honest concern in Patrick Thompson's eyes, she found it difficult to imagine sinister intent. I'm listening, she said cautiously. I need a governess for Emma. Someone to teach her letters and figures, and yes, perhaps even watercolors and piano when she's a bit older. Mabel does what she can, but she has the house to manage, and her eyes aren't what they used to be for reading. He paused. The position would include room and board at the ranch, plus a modest salary. Sophia stared at him, surprised by the offer. Mr. Thompson, you know nothing about me. I know you risked yourself to save my daughter without a moment's hesitation. That tells me enough about your character. His green eyes held her steadily. The rest, I suppose, we'd learn in time. Say yes. Emma piped up, bouncing in her seat. You can sleep in the blue room. It has flowers on the curtains. Sophia couldn't help but smile at the child's enthusiasm. Still, the offer seemed too fortuitous. Why would you trust a stranger with your daughter's education? Patrick's expression grew serious. Miss Fairchild, good people are hard to come by out here, and I believe in trusting my instincts. Mine are telling me you're someone who could bring something valuable to Emma's life. He hesitated, then added, and perhaps you could use a fresh start as much as we could use your help. The perceptiveness of his statement startled her. Indeed, what options did she have? Her money would run out quickly at any boarding house, and then what? The alternatives that flashed through her mind, seeking work at the saloon or throwing herself on the mercy of the church, were equally unappealing. I would need references, she said, testing his sincerity, and I would be happy to provide them. Sheriff Hollister has known me since I arrived in Nebraska 8 years ago. Reverend Miller baptized Emma. You can speak to either of them before making your decision. His readiness to provide references reassured her. This was no hasty, improper suggestion, but a genuine offer of employment. Could I have until tomorrow to consider? She asked. Patrick nodded, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a few coins, which he placed on the table despite Mrs. Jensen's insistence that the meal was free. Of course. We'll be in town until midday tomorrow, purchasing supplies. You can find me at Greeley's Mercantile if you decide to accept." As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Emma slipped her small hand into Sophia's. "Please say yes, Miss Fairchild. I promise to be good." Sophia felt something tug at her heart as she looked down at the earnest little face. "I'll think about it very carefully, Emma." That night, in the sparsely furnished room she'd rented above the milliner's shop, Sophia weighed her options. The stark reality was that she had few choices. Her family's banishment had been absolute: no money, no connections, no way back to her former life. Patrick Thompson's offer represented security, purpose, and perhaps even a chance to make a difference in a child's life. By morning, her decision was made. After a breakfast of strong coffee and toast, she made her way to the sheriff's office, determined to verify Patrick Thompson's standing in the community before committing herself. Sheriff Hollister, a grizzled man with a silver mustache, was direct in his assessment. Patrick Thompson, one of the finest men in the county, built that ranch up from nothing after his wife died, never known him to break his word or mistreat anyone. Similar sentiments were echoed by Reverend Miller, who added, "He's raised that little girl as best he can, but a child needs a woman's influence. I've been suggesting he hire a governess for months." Thus reassured, Sophia made her way to Greeley's Mercantile, her few possessions packed in her satchel. She found Patrick at the counter, settling his account while Emma examined a display of candy sticks. "Mr. Thompson," she called softly. He turned, and something like hope flickered across his features when he saw her. "Miss Fairchild, I've considered your offer, and I've spoken with both Sheriff Hollister and Reverend Miller." She drew a deep breath. "If the position is still available, I would like to accept it." The smile that transformed his face was startling in its warmth. "The position is yours." He extended his hand, and this time Sophia took it without hesitation. Emma, spotting her, let out a squeal of delight and rushed over. "You're coming home with us." "Yes, Emma, I am." The little girl threw her arms around Sophia's waist, hugging her tightly. Over the child's golden head, Sophia's eyes met Patrick's. Something unspoken passed between them, not romance, not yet, but perhaps the first tendrils of understanding. Two people, brought together by circumstance, each carrying their own sorrows, attempting to forge something new. "Welcome to our family, Miss Fairchild," Patrick said quietly. The journey to the Thompson ranch took just over an hour by wagon. As they left the bustle of Kearney behind, Sophia watched the landscape unfold: rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers, stands of cottonwood trees marking the path of distant creeks, and the occasional homestead breaking the horizon. Emma chattered continuously, pointing out landmarks and animals, while Patrick occasionally added details about the area's history or the neighboring ranchers. Sophia learned that Patrick had come west after the Civil War, like many young men seeking a fresh start. He'd met his late wife, Caroline, in Omaha and brought her to Kearney to build their ranch together. "It was just open prairie then," he explained, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We lived in a soddy for the first year while I built the house. Caroline planted every tree you'll see around the place." The wistfulness in his voice when he spoke of his wife touched something in Sophia. Clearly, he had loved Caroline deeply, and her loss still affected him. 6 years later, as they crested a gentle hill, Patrick pointed ahead. "There it is, Thompson Ranch." Sophia leaned forward, taking in the sight. A 2-story clapboard house painted white with green shutters stood proudly against the Nebraska sky. A large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings formed a neat cluster nearby. A windmill turned lazily above a water tank, and a vegetable garden sprawled to one side of the house. It was modest compared to the Fairchild mansion in Boston, but there was something undeniably appealing about its honest simplicity. This was a home built with care and maintained with pride. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Patrick's expression softened. "Thank you. We've worked hard to make it so." As they pulled into the yard, a thin woman with iron-gray hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Emma bounced excitedly in the wagon. "Aunt Mabel." "We brought Miss Fairchild. She's going to be my governess." Mabel Johnston approached the wagon as Patrick helped Sophia down. The older woman's sharp eyes took in everything from Sophia's travel-worn dress to her city-bred posture. "So you're to teach our Emma, are you?" Her tone was not unfriendly, but it held a note of assessment. "Yes, Mrs. Johnston. Mr. Thompson has been kind enough to offer me the position." "It's Miss Johnston," the woman corrected. "Never married, and it's Mabel to those who live under this roof." Her expression softened slightly. "You look about done in, child. Come inside and have some tea while Patrick sees to the horses." The interior of the Thompson home surprised Sophia. While certainly not as lavish as her family's Boston residence, it was far from the crude frontier dwelling she had imagined. The furniture was solid and well made, the floors were polished wood, and curtains of good quality hung at the windows. Books lined shelves in the parlor, and a modest piano stood in one corner. "Caroline insisted on the piano," Mabel explained, following Sophia's gaze. "Ordered it all the way from Chicago. Cost a small fortune to get it here, but Patrick never denied her anything if he could help it." "It's beautiful," Sophia said, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "You play?" Mabel asked, setting out cups for tea. "Yes, though I'm out of practice." "Well, it's been silent too long. Might be nice to hear music in this house again." Mabel poured the tea and gestured for Sophia to sit. "Now, let's be plain with each other, Miss Fairchild. What brings a young woman of obvious breeding to the Nebraska frontier alone?" Sophia hesitated, but something in Mabel's direct gaze told her that honesty would be respected more than any polite fiction. "My family banished me," she said simply. "I made a mistake, or rather, was caught in a situation that appeared compromising, and my father could not tolerate the scandal." Mabel's eyebrows raised slightly. "Harsh punishment for what I suspect was an innocent indiscretion. The appearance was enough. My father values his social position above all else." "And your mother?" Sophia felt the familiar ache. She did not contradict him. In our home, his word was law. Mabel studied her thoughtfully. "Well, you'll find Patrick Thompson a different sort of man entirely. He has his principles and expects them to be respected, but he's fair to a fault." She paused. "He's been alone too long with just Emma and an old woman for company. It'll be good to have young blood around the place." Before Sophia could respond to this rather cryptic statement, Emma burst into the kitchen, followed by her father. The child immediately claimed Sophia's attention, eager to show her the blue room that was to be hers. The next few days were a whirlwind of adjustment as Sophia settled into life at Thompson Ranch. Her duties were straightforward. Emma's education would occupy her mornings, while afternoons might be spent assisting Mabel with light household tasks or continuing lessons through practical applications, counting eggs, measuring ingredients, or identifying plants in the garden. Patrick was often absent during daylight hours, seeing to the cattle or meeting with neighboring ranchers. But he was invariably present for the evening meal, during which he listened intently to Emma's excited recounting of her day's lessons. "Miss Fairchild says I'm very clever with my letters," the child announced proudly on the third evening. "And tomorrow she's going to teach me about fractions using the apple pie." Patrick's eyes met Sophia's across the table. "Creative teaching, Miss Fairchild." "Practical application helps concepts stick," she replied. And please, if I'm to call you Patrick, you must call me Sophia." A week passed, then two. Sophia found herself increasingly at ease in the rhythm of ranch life. Her city pallor began to fade under the Nebraska sun, and her hands, once soft and unmarked, now bore the occasional nick or callus from gardening or helping Emma collect eggs. One evening, after Emma had been put to bed and Mabel had retired to her room, Sophia found herself alone in the parlor. On impulse, she sat at the piano and began to play a simple melody, her fingers remembering what her mind had nearly forgotten. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't hear Patrick enter until he spoke. "That's beautiful. What is it called?" Sophia's hand stilled on the keys. "Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. I'm afraid I'm rather rusty." It sounded perfect to me. He moved to stand beside the piano. Caroline loved music, but she couldn't play. She always said she'd learn someday. "I could teach Emma when she's a bit older," Sophia offered. "Her hands are still too small for proper technique, but children often have a natural affinity for music." Patrick nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'd like that. Caroline would have wanted her to learn." An unexpected question formed in Sophia's mind, and before she could reconsider, she asked, "Do you still miss her very much?" If Patrick was surprised by her directness, he didn't show it. "Every day," he admitted, "but differently now. At first the grief was like drowning, now it's more like carrying something precious that occasionally catches the light." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry, that probably doesn't make much sense." "It makes perfect sense," Sophia said softly, thinking of her own grief for the family that had cast her out. "Some losses reshape us entirely." Patrick's eyes found hers, and for a moment, something electric passed between them, a recognition of shared understanding despite their different circumstances. The moment was broken by a sudden crash of thunder that rattled the windows. Patrick moved to look outside. "Storm's coming." "A bad one, from the look of those clouds." He turned back to Sophia. "Would you mind checking on Emma? She sometimes wakes during thunderstorms." Sophia nodded and made her way upstairs to Emma's room. The child was indeed awake, sitting up in bed with wide, fearful eyes as lightning illuminated the room. "I don't like the thunder," Emma whispered as Sophia sat on the edge of the bed. "It can be frightening," Sophia agreed, smoothing back the girl's blonde curls. "Would you like me to stay until you fall asleep?" Emma nodded vigorously, scooting over to make room. Sophia settled beside her, one arm around the child's small shoulders. "My mother used to tell me that thunder was just the angels rearranging furniture in heaven," Sophia said, smiling at the memory. "It always made the storm seem less frightening." "Do you think Mama is in heaven moving furniture?" Emma asked sleepily. Sophia's heart constricted. "I'm sure she's doing something beautiful up there, watching over you always." As the storm raged outside, Sophia sang softly until Emma's breathing deepened into sleep. When she was certain the child wouldn't wake, she carefully extracted herself from the bed and tiptoed to the door. Patrick was standing in the hallway, a lantern in his hand, his expression unreadable in the shadowy light. "She's asleep," Sophia whispered. "Thank you," he replied, his voice equally soft. "You have a gift with her. She makes it easy. She's a remarkable child." Patrick nodded, pride evident even in the dim light. "She's the best of Caroline and hopefully some of the better parts of me as well." He hesitated. "Would you like some coffee? I doubt either of us will sleep much with this storm." Downstairs, the kitchen was warm and inviting despite the tempest outside. Patrick built up the fire in the stove and prepared coffee while Sophia sat at the table, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the occasional draft. "May I ask you something, Sophia?" Patrick said as he placed a steaming mug before her. "Of course. What really brought you to Kearney? The truth, if you don't mind." Sophia curled her fingers around the warm mug, considering her response. I told Mabel the essence of it. I was caught in what appeared to be a compromising situation with a young man, the gardener's son. It was innocent, truly. He had helped me when I twisted my ankle in the garden, and in gratitude, I embraced him. My father saw only what he chose to see: his daughter in the arms of a servant. Patrick's expression darkened. And for that he cast you out. His own daughter. The Fairchilds have a certain standing in Boston society. Appearances matter above all else. Sophia took a sip of coffee, the bitterness matching her words. My father gave me an hour to pack my things and enough money for a train ticket west. He said I was no longer welcome in his home and that I should not attempt to return. And your mother allowed this. My mother has never contradicted my father in 25 years of marriage. I didn't expect her to start on my behalf. Sophia was surprised by the lack of emotion in her voice. The pain was there, but dulled now, like an old wound. I remembered Martha's letters from years ago. Kearney seemed as good a destination as any. Patrick was silent for a long moment, his expression troubled. I can't imagine doing that to Emma, no matter what she might do. Not all fathers are like you, Patrick, Sophia said softly. Some see their children as extensions of themselves, vessels for their ambitions or reflections of their social standing. When the vessel cracks, they discard it. Another crash of thunder punctuated her words, making them both jump slightly. Patrick reached across the table, his hand covering hers in a gesture of spontaneous comfort. Their loss is our gain, he said simply. Sophia looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. The sincerity there moved something within her that she had thought frozen by her family's rejection. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain lashing at the windows. Patrick withdrew his hand slowly, but the warmth of his touch lingered. They sat in companionable silence as the storm gradually moved eastward, the thunder becoming more distant, the lightning less frequent. When Sophia finally bid him good night and climbed the stairs to her blue room, she found herself thinking not of what she had lost, but of what she might, perhaps, be finding. The summer months passed in a haze of golden sunlight and growing comfort. Under Sophia's patient guidance, Emma's education progressed remarkably. The child was naturally bright and eager to please, soaking up knowledge like the parched prairie absorbed rain. Sophia found unexpected fulfillment in her role as governess. In Boston, teaching had never been considered a proper aspiration for a Fairchild daughter. Yet here, watching Emma's face light up with understanding or her small hands carefully form letters, Sophia discovered a sense of purpose she had never known in the drawing rooms and ballrooms of her previous life. Her relationship with Patrick evolved gradually from employer and employee to something resembling friendship. They often sat on the porch after Emma was asleep, discussing books or local affairs, or simply enjoying the symphony of night sounds that rose from the prairie. Sophia came to appreciate Patrick's quiet strength, his unwavering dedication to Emma, and his respectful treatment of everyone from Mabel to the ranch hands. Here was a man who judged others not by their social standing, but by their character, a stark contrast to the world she had left behind. For his part, Patrick found himself increasingly drawn to Sophia's gentle resilience. The young woman who had arrived in Kearney with nothing but a satchel and her dignity had blossomed in the Nebraska sun. She brought music and laughter back into his home, tenderness to his daughter's life, and a subtle grace to the most ordinary of days. One particularly hot August afternoon, Patrick suggested they take Emma to the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. The water's cool and clear, and there's a perfect spot for swimming just past the old cottonwood. Emma immediately began pleading to go, and Sophia, wilting slightly in the heavy heat, readily agreed. Mabel packed a picnic basket, and soon they were making their way across the pasture toward the line of trees that marked the creek's path. The swimming hole was everything Patrick had promised, a deep, clear pool beneath spreading cottonwood branches, with sandy banks perfect for wading. Emma, wearing an old dress designated for such adventures, splashed joyfully in the shallows while Patrick watched from the shore. Sophia had removed her shoes and stockings to dangle her feet in the cool water, her skirts carefully arranged to maintain propriety. The heat had brought a flush to her cheeks, and tendrils of hair escaped her simple bun, curling damply against her neck. "You can go in further if you like," Patrick said, noticing her longing glance at the deeper water. "No one will see you out here." Sophia hesitated, years of propriety warring with the temptation of relief from the oppressive heat. "I haven't been swimming since I was a child," she admitted. "It wouldn't be proper in Boston." "This isn't Boston," Patrick reminded her with a slight smile, "and you look about to melt." After another moment's deliberation, Sophia stood. "I'll wade a bit deeper, but I'm keeping my dress on." "I would expect nothing less," Patrick assured her, his eyes crinkling with amusement. Gathering her skirts, Sophia stepped carefully into the creek, sighing with pleasure as the cool water reached her calves, then her knees. Emma splashed toward her, face alight with excitement. "Come see the minnows, Miss Fairchild. They're hiding under that big rock." Before Sophia could respond, Emma's foot slipped on a mossy stone, and the child plunged face first into the water. Sophia lunged forward instinctively, catching Emma before her head could strike the rocky bottom. The sudden movement unbalanced Sophia as well, and she found herself fully immersed, her dress billowing around her like a water lily. She surfaced, sputtering, with Emma secure in her arms. "Oh!" the child exclaimed, more surprised than frightened. "We both fell in." Patrick was at the water's edge in an instant, concern etched on his features. "Are you both all right?" Sophia pushed wet hair from her face and felt a bubble of laughter rise in her throat. The situation, a Boston lady drenched from head to toe in a Nebraska creek, struck her as absurdly funny. "We're perfectly fine," she managed, her laughter infectious enough that Emma began giggling too. "Just a bit wetter than planned." Patrick's worried expression melted into a grin. "You look like a couple of drowned kittens." He waded in, still wearing his boots, and lifted Emma from Sophia's arms. Then, setting the child safely on the bank, he turned back and offered Sophia his hand. "Your dress must weigh 50 pounds now," he observed as he helped her toward shore. Indeed, the sodden fabric clung to her uncomfortably, making each step a laborious effort. Just as they reached the shallows, Sophia's foot caught on a submerged root, and she stumbled forward against Patrick's chest. His arms came around her automatically, steadying her. For a breathless moment, they stood frozen, the contact between them both shocking and somehow inevitable. Sophia looked up to find Patrick's green eyes dark with something that made her heart race faster than her near fall warranted. "I've got you," he said, his voice rough. "I know," she whispered back. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged, until Emma's delighted voice broke the spell. "Miss Fairchild, you look like a mermaid with your hair all wet." Sophia stepped back, suddenly aware of how inappropriate their proximity might appear. Patrick cleared his throat and turned his attention to spreading the picnic blanket in a sunny spot where they could dry out. As they shared the lunch, Mabel had packed fried chicken, cornbread, and fresh peaches. Sophia found herself acutely conscious of Patrick in a way she hadn't been before. The way the sun highlighted the auburn tones in his dark hair, the strength in his hands as he broke the corn bread, the gentle patience in his interactions with Emma. When had admiration and friendship begun to transform into something deeper? She couldn't pinpoint the moment, only that it had happened gradually, like a sunrise imperceptible in its progress, until suddenly the world was bathed in new light. That evening, after putting Emma to bed with reassurances that their swimming adventure wouldn't be their last, Sophia sat at the piano, playing softly. The house was quiet, Mabel having retired early with a headache, and Patrick was still in the barn seeing to a mare about to foal. The creek incident had left Sophia unsettled, not from the soaking, which had been rather refreshing in the August heat, but from the moment of connection with Patrick. She'd caught him looking at her several times during their picnic, his expression thoughtful, almost wondering. But he had maintained a careful distance for the remainder of the day, as if the physical boundary between them needed reinforcement after that brief, electric proximity. Lost in these thoughts, Sophia didn't hear Patrick enter until he spoke. "That's new," he said, nodding toward the melody her fingers were creating. "I don't recognize it." Sophia's hand stilled. "It's nothing, really, just something I was composing." "You write music?" He moved closer, genuine interest in his expression, occasionally. "It's not something I shared much in Boston. My father considered it a waste of time." She shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "He preferred that I practice established pieces for entertaining guests. I'd like to hear the rest of it if you're willing." The simple request, offered without judgment or expectation, moved her. Sophia nodded and began to play again, allowing the melody to flow as it had been forming in her mind, a gentle, wistful tune that gradually built in complexity, reflecting her own emotional journey from Boston to Kearney. When the last notes faded, Patrick was silent for so long that Sophia finally looked up, uncertain. His expression was one of quiet amazement. "That was beautiful," he said at last. "Truly beautiful. Does it have a name?" Sophia shook her head. "It's not finished yet." "When it is, I hope you'll play it for Emma and me again." "Of course." She rose from the piano bench, suddenly needing some distance from the intensity of his gaze. "How is the mare? Doing well? The foal should come before morning." Patrick accepted the change of subject with characteristic sensitivity. "I'll need to check on her through the night." "I could help," Sophia offered, surprising herself. "I've never seen a foal being born." Patrick considered this, then nodded. "It might be a few hours yet." "I'll knock on your door when the time comes if you're sure." "I'm sure." True to his word, Patrick's gentle knock came around midnight. Sophia, who had been reading rather than sleeping, was already dressed in a simple skirt and blouse. She followed him quietly through the darkened house and across the yard to the barn, where a lantern burned low near one of the stalls. The mare, a beautiful chestnut named Penny, was clearly in labor, her sides heaving with contractions. Patrick spoke to her in low, soothing tones as he checked her progress. "Won't be long now," he told Sophia. "She's doing fine. This is her second foal." Sophia stood slightly back, not wanting to interfere but fascinated by the process. Patrick worked with quiet efficiency, his movements gentle but confident. The mare seemed to trust him implicitly, allowing his examination without protest. As the birth progressed, Sophia found herself drawn forward, responding to Patrick's occasional requests for clean towels or fresh water. When the foal finally emerged, a gangly, wet creature with impossibly long legs, she couldn't suppress a gasp of wonder. "Oh, Patrick, he's beautiful," Patrick corrected with a smile, already wiping the newborn clean. "It's a filly." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as they ensured both mare and foal were healthy and comfortable. Patrick demonstrated how to check that the filly was nursing properly, explaining each step with the same patient thoroughness he might use with Emma. By the time they left the barn, The first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky. They walked back to the house in companionable silence, both tired but satisfied with the night's work. At the bottom of the stairs, Patrick paused. "Thank you for your help." "I did very little," Sophia demurred. "But thank you for allowing me to witness it. It was remarkable." "Life usually is," he said softly. Then, with a slight hesitation that was unlike him, he added, "Sophia, I've been meaning to ask you something." The seriousness of his tone made her heart skip. "Yes, the harvest dance is in 2 weeks. It's a tradition in Kearney. Everyone from the surrounding farms and ranches gathers in town." He looked down, then met her eyes again. "I was wondering if you might accompany us, Emma and me." It was a perfectly reasonable request, yet Sophia sensed there was more to it than a simple social outing. "I'd be happy to come along." "Good," Patrick nodded, seeming both pleased and slightly nervous. "That's good. We should try to get some sleep before Emma wakes." As Sophia climbed the stairs to her room, she couldn't help wondering if Patrick Thompson, the steady, confident rancher, had just taken a tentative step toward courting his daughter's governess. The harvest dance was the social event of the season in Kearney, with families coming from miles around to celebrate the successful gathering of crops. The town hall was transformed with autumn decorations, golden corn stalks, pumpkins, and brilliantly colored leaves adorning every available surface. Sophia wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the matching color in her eyes, with a cameo brooch that had been a gift from her mother on her 16th birthday, one of the few treasured items she had brought from Boston. Emma, dressed in a new pinafore Mabel had made for the occasion, could barely contain her excitement as they rode into town. "Will there be cake, Pa, and dancing? Can I dance with you?" "Yes to all of that," Patrick assured her, looking handsome in a clean white shirt and dark jacket that emphasized his broad shoulders. He had trimmed his hair and beard for the occasion, and Sophia caught herself glancing at him more often than strictly necessary. The town hall was already bustling when they arrived. A small band played lively tunes while couples twirled across the makeshift dance floor. Tables laden with food lined one wall: pies, cakes, roasts, and every manner of harvest bounty. Emma was immediately swept into a group of children playing a game in one corner, leaving Sophia and Patrick standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the festivities. "Would you care to dance, Miss Fairchild?" Patrick asked formally, extending his hand. The use of her surname after months of Sophia caught her attention, but before she could respond, a buxom woman in a bright green dress descended upon them. "Patrick Thompson, I was beginning to think you'd become a complete hermit." She turned a calculating eye on Sophia. "And who is this?" "Vera, this is Miss Sophia Fairchild, Emma's governess. Sophia, Mrs. Vera Simmons, our neighbor to the west." Vera's painted eyebrows arched significantly. "A governess? How proper of you, Patrick. Though I must say, when you mentioned wanting to expand your household, this isn't quite what I had imagined." Something in her insinuating tone made Sophia stiffen. Patrick's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Fairchild has been a blessing to Emma," he said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe I was about to claim a dance." He led Sophia away from Vera's speculative gaze and onto the dance floor. As his hand settled at her waist for the waltz, he leaned closer to speak quietly. "I apologize for Vera. She's been trying to marry me off to one of her nieces for years." "No apology necessary," Sophia assured him, trying to ignore the pleasant warmth of his hand at her back. "Though I do wonder at her comment about expanding your household." Patrick's steps faltered slightly before he recovered. "Ah, that. A passing remark I made months ago about Emma needing more family than just her old father." Before Sophia could pursue this intriguing statement, the music ended, and they were separated by a rush of changing partners. For the next hour, Sophia found herself passed from one dance partner to another, as the men of Kearney discovered there was a new young woman in their midst. She caught glimpses of Patrick dancing with various ladies, including the persistent Vera Simmons, but his attention seemed divided. More than once, she looked up to find his eyes following her across the room. During a brief respite, Sophia made her way to the refreshment table for a cup of punch. She was just lifting it to her lips when a familiar voice stopped her cold. Well, if it isn't the disgraced Miss Fairchild." Sophia turned slowly, disbelief washing over her. Charles Blackwood, the man standing before her, was impeccably dressed, his Boston accent as pronounced as her own. Charles Blackwood had been a frequent visitor to the Fairchild home, a business associate of her father's with aspirations to be more. "What an unexpected pleasure," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "When your father mentioned you had gone west, I never imagined I would encounter you in this charming establishment. What are you doing in Kearney?" Sophia managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Business, my dear. The Blackwood Company is expanding its interests in railroad investments." His gaze swept over her critically. "You're looking well, considering your circumstances, though perhaps a bit sun-darkened for Boston tastes." Sophia lifted her chin. "I find I care very little for Boston tastes these days, Mr. Blackwood." Charles leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Your father was devastated by your behavior, you know. Your mother has barely shown her face in society since your departure." The barb struck home, but Sophia refused to show it. "How fortunate that you've come to update me on the gossip. Now, if you'll excuse me, not so fast." Charles caught her arm as she tried to step away. "I'm authorized to make you an offer, Sophia. Your father is willing to welcome you home conditionally, of course. The scandal has died down somewhat and with a suitable period of contrition." He smiled thinly. "You might even be marriageable again to the right sort of understanding gentleman." Sophia stared at him, comprehension dawning. "Such as yourself. I've always admired you, Sophia. Even now, fallen as you are, I see potential." His grip tightened slightly. "Think carefully before refusing. This frontier experiment of yours might be novel now, but what future does it offer? No respectable man will marry a woman with your history. Let go of my arm, Mr. Blackwood." Sophia's voice was low but firm. "Is there a problem here?" Patrick's quiet question carried an underlying steel that made Charles Blackwood release Sophia immediately. The rancher had appeared at her side without either of them noticing, his expression carefully controlled but his eyes alert. "Not at all," Charles replied smoothly. "Miss Fairchild and I are old acquaintances from Boston. I was just expressing my surprise at finding her here." "I see." Patrick turned to Sophia. "Emma is asking for you. She wants to show you her prize from the apple bobbing contest." Grateful for the escape, Sophia nodded. "Of course." "Mr. Blackwood, I wish you a safe journey back to Boston." As she moved away with Patrick, she could feel Charles Blackwood's calculating gaze following them through the crowd. "Are you all right?" Patrick asked once they were out of earshot. "You're pale." "I'm fine, just surprised to see someone from my past here." She forced a smile. "Where's Emma with her prize?" Patrick studied her face for a moment longer, then nodded toward a corner where Emma was proudly displaying a caramel apple to a group of admiring children. The sight of the child's innocent joy helped restore Sophia's equilibrium. For the remainder of the evening, Sophia threw herself into the festivities with determined cheerfulness. She danced with Patrick twice more, laughed at the right moments, and complimented the local ladies on their cooking. If her smile occasionally seemed fixed, no one but Patrick seemed to notice. It was nearly midnight when they finally gathered a sleepy Emma and made their way to the wagon for the journey home. The child fell asleep almost immediately, nestled between them on the seat. They had traveled perhaps a mile when Patrick finally broke the silence. "Who is Charles Blackwood?" Sophia sighed, knowing the question had been inevitable. "A business associate of my father's. He had hopes of courting me before everything happened. And now he claims my father would allow me to return home under certain conditions." She looked straight ahead at the moonlit road. "One of which, I suspect, would be accepting Mr. Blackwood's suit." Patrick's hands tightened on the reins. "Is that what you want, to go back to Boston?" The question hung in the night air between them. Sophia turned to look at him, really look at him, in the silvery moonlight. This man who had offered her sanctuary when she had nothing, who treated her with unfailing respect, whose quiet strength had become as essential to her days as breathing. "No," she said softly. "I have no desire to return to Boston or to marry Charles Blackwood." Something in Patrick's posture relaxed, though his expression remained guarded. "What did he say that upset you?" Sophia hesitated, reluctant to repeat Charles's cutting remarks. But Patrick deserved honesty. He suggested that no respectable man would marry someone with my history, that this frontier experiment offers me no future. She attempted a light laugh that fell flat. "Perhaps he's right about that much." The wagon stopped abruptly as Patrick pulled the horses to a halt. He turned to face her, careful not to disturb the sleeping Emma between them. "Sophia," he began, his voice intense despite its quietness, "you must know that's not true." "Any man would be fortunate to," he broke off, seeming to struggle with his words. In the moonlight his face was a study in conflicting emotions. "To what?" Sophia prompted, her heart suddenly racing. Patrick's gaze dropped to Emma, then returned to Sophia's face. "This isn't how I planned to have this conversation," he said finally. "Not on the road with Emma between us, but I can't let you believe what that man said." He drew a deep breath. "Sophia, you've brought light back into our home. Emma adores you. He paused again, then continued more steadily. "I care for you more than I thought possible after Caroline. I had resigned myself to raising Emma alone, focusing on the ranch. I never expected to find someone who could make me hope for more." Sophia sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter the moment. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that when the time is right, when you're ready, I would be honored if you would consider becoming more than Emma's governess." Patrick's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not asking for an answer now. You deserve time to consider what you truly want for your future. But I needed you to know that there is a place for you here, not as an employee, but as family," Sophia finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. Patrick nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Family," he agreed. The word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Sophia felt tears pricking at her eyes, not from sadness, but from a sudden, overwhelming sense of belonging that she had never experienced, even in the grand Fairchild mansion. "Thank you," she managed, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within her. Patrick seemed to understand. With gentle hands, he flicked the reins, and the wagon resumed its journey toward home. That night, lying awake in her blue room with the flowered curtains, Sophia replayed Patrick's words over and over. He hadn't exactly proposed marriage. He'd been careful to give her space, to acknowledge that she might need time. But the intention had been clear. Patrick Thompson, widower and rancher, was offering her a place in his family not from pity or convenience, but from genuine affection. The realization both terrified and exhilarated her. Could she be a proper mother to Emma? Could she be a suitable wife to Patrick, a man still carrying the memory of his beloved Caroline? And most importantly, did her heart truly belong here on the Nebraska prairie? Or was she simply grasping at the first safe harbor she had found after her family's rejection? These questions kept her awake long into the night, but by morning one thing was certain. Charles Blackwood's offer held no temptation whatsoever. Whatever her future held, it would not be in Boston. The days following the harvest dance brought a noticeable shift in the atmosphere at Thompson Ranch. Patrick maintained a respectful distance, true to his word about giving Sophia time to consider her feelings. But small changes were evident: flowers appearing on the breakfast table, his hand lingering briefly when passing the salt at dinner, his eyes seeking hers across the room with quiet intentionality. Emma, perceptive as always, noticed the change. "Pa smiles more now," she observed one afternoon as Sophia helped her with a sampler, "and he whistles when he comes in from the barn." Sophia felt a blush creep up her neck. "Does he?" Emma nodded sagely. "Aunt Mabel says it's high time, too. She says Pa's been alone too long." Before Sophia could formulate a response to this frank assessment, a commotion outside drew their attention. Hooves pounded in the yard, and a man's voice called urgently for Patrick. Setting aside their sewing, Sophia and Emma went to the window. One of the ranch hands, Joe Bailey, was dismounting from a lathered horse, his expression grave as Patrick emerged from the barn to meet him. The men spoke intently for several minutes, their body language conveying the seriousness of the conversation. Finally, Patrick nodded and clapped Joe on the shoulder before turning toward the house. "Something's wrong," Emma said, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Pa only looks like that when it's bad news." Sophia placed a reassuring hand on the child's shoulder. "Let's wait to hear what your father has to say before we worry." Patrick's face was indeed grave when he entered the house. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Sophia had come to recognize as a sign of stress. "What is it, Pa?" Emma asked immediately. Patrick's expression softened slightly as he looked at his daughter. "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Some cattle have gone missing from the north pasture, that's all." "Stolen?" Sophia asked quietly. Patrick nodded. Joe found cut fences and clear signs of rustling. "Sheriff Hollister is already on his way out to have a look." "Is that unusual in this area?" Sophia had heard of cattle rustling, of course, but Patrick had never mentioned it as a concern before. "It happens, but not often." Patrick's jaw tightened. "What's concerning is the timing. Joe says the tracks are fresh, no more than a day old." Understanding dawned on Sophia. The harvest dance had drawn virtually everyone from the surrounding ranches into town, leaving properties vulnerable. So they waited until everyone would be away, she concluded. "Exactly." Patrick knelt to Emma's level. "Emma, I need to ride out with Joe and meet the sheriff. I might be gone overnight if we need to track the herd." The child's lip trembled slightly. "But you promised to read the next chapter of our book tonight." "I know, and I'm sorry." Patrick brushed a strand of hair from Emma's face. "Miss Fairchild can read it to you, and I'll be back as soon as I can. Can you be my brave girl until then?" Emma nodded reluctantly. "Will you be careful, Pa? What if the bad men are still there?" "Sheriff Hollister will be with us, and Joe, and probably some of the neighboring ranchers too, will be perfectly safe." Patrick hugged his daughter tightly. "Now, I need to pack a few things. Can you help Aunt Mabel set out some food for us to take along?" As Emma ran to the kitchen, Patrick turned to Sophia. "I'm sorry about this. I wouldn't leave if it weren't necessary." "Of course you must go," Sophia assured him. "We'll be fine here. Mabel and I can manage Emma." Patrick stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't like leaving you, especially with rustlers in the area. Keep the doors locked tonight, and there's a shotgun in my bedroom if you need it." The thought of handling a firearm was terrifying, but Sophia nodded. "We'll be careful. How many cattle were taken?" Joe estimates at least 20 head. Not a devastating loss in itself, but if we don't catch them, they'll be back for more. His expression hardened. "And I don't take kindly to thieves." Within the hour, Patrick was ready to depart. He had changed into sturdier clothing and packed provisions for at least 2 days. As he prepared to mount his horse, Emma clung to his leg, suddenly reluctant to let him go despite her earlier promise of bravery. "Come back soon, Pa," she pleaded. Patrick knelt and gathered her close. "Before you know it, Emma girl, mind Miss Fairchild and Aunt Mabel while I'm gone." He rose and turned to Sophia, who stood a few paces back, giving father and daughter their moment. For a heartbeat, he seemed about to say something significant, but then Joe and 2 other ranch hands rode into the yard, ready to depart. Instead, Patrick simply touched the brim of his hat. "Take care of our girl," he said, his emphasis on our subtle but unmistakable. "We will," Sophia promised. "Be safe, Patrick." As the men rode away, Sophia felt a curious mixture of anxiety and determination. This was the first real test of her place in this household, not merely as Emma's teacher, but as the temporary head of the family in Patrick's absence. She wouldn't let him down. The day passed without incident, though Emma was subdued during her lessons and kept glancing toward the window as if expecting her father's return at any moment. Mabel maintained a brisk efficiency, but Sophia noticed the older woman checking the locks more frequently than usual and keeping the kitchen knife within easy reach as she prepared dinner. By nightfall, there was still no word from Patrick or the sheriff. Sophia read to Emma as promised, then tucked the child into bed with extra hugs and reassurances. "Will Pa be home tomorrow?" Emma asked sleepily. "I hope so, sweetheart." Sophia smoothed the blanket. "He'll come back as soon as he can." "I had a bad dream last night," Emma confessed, her voice small. "About Mama. She was calling for me, but I couldn't find her." Sophia's heart constricted. "It was only a dream, Emma. Your Mama loves you very much, even though she can't be with you, and your Pa will be home soon." "Will you stay with me until I fall asleep?" The child's request echoed the night of the thunderstorm. "Of course I will." Sophia sat beside Emma's bed, holding her small hand until her breathing deepened into sleep. Then she quietly made her way downstairs, where Mabel was knitting by the fire. "She's asleep," Sophia reported, sinking into a chair opposite the housekeeper. Mabel nodded, her needles clicking steadily. "Children sense when something's amiss, no matter how we try to shield them." "You think Patrick will find the rustlers?" The older woman's hand stilled momentarily. "Patrick Thompson is not a man to be crossed. If anyone can track them down, he will." She resumed her knitting. "But cattle thieves can be a desperate lot. I pray he doesn't take unnecessary risks." The concern in Mabel's voice matched Sophia's own unspoken fears. She had come to care deeply for Patrick more than she had fully admitted even to herself until this moment of separation and worry. "Tell me about Caroline," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the request. "What was she like?" Mabel looked up sharply, studying Sophia's face before answering. "Caroline was a city girl like you, from Omaha. Delicate, pretty as a picture, with a laugh that could charm birds from the trees." A fond smile softened the housekeeper's normally stern countenance. "She loved Patrick something fierce, but this life was harder on her than she expected. The isolation, the endless work, the harsh winters. But she stayed," Sophia observed. "She stayed because she loved him. And he did everything in his power to make her happy, built this house bigger than they needed, ordered that piano all the way from Chicago, even talked about moving closer to town someday." Mabel sighed. Her death nearly destroyed him. For 2 years he barely spoke except to Emma. threw himself into the ranch work until he was too exhausted to think. Sophia absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the steady, controlled man she had come to know. When did he begin to recover? Gradually, with Emma's help. That child became his reason for everything. Mabel fixed Sophia with a penetrating gaze. And then you came along. I didn't do anything special, Sophia protested. Didn't you? Mabel's eyebrows raised. You brought music back into this house. You made Emma flourish. And most importantly, you made Patrick see that life could hold joy again. Her voice gentled. I've watched him these past months, coming back to himself in ways I feared he never would. Sophia felt her cheeks warm under Mabel's knowing look. I care for them both very much. I know you do, child, and they for you. Mabel returned to her knitting. Now you should get some rest. Tomorrow might be a long day. But rest proved elusive. Sophia lay awake in her room, listening to the night sounds of the prairie and straining for the hoofbeats that would signal Patrick's return. When sleep finally claimed her, it was light and troubled. She awoke before dawn to the sound of raised voices. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was still dreaming. Then she recognized Patrick's deep tones, edged with anger, coming from downstairs. Hurriedly pulling on a robe over her nightgown, Sophia made her way to the staircase. From the landing, she could see Patrick standing in the front room, his clothing dusty and disheveled. Sheriff Hollister sat heavily in a chair by the fire, while Mabel busied herself pouring coffee. There was no sign of the ranch hands who had departed with Patrick. Can't simply let it go, Sheriff, Patrick was saying, frustration evident in his stance. 20 head of cattle is just the beginning if they think they can get away with it. I understand your position, Patrick, but we lost their trail at the river, the sheriff replied wearily. They could be halfway to Kansas by now. Or they could be hiding out, waiting for things to quiet down before striking again, Patrick countered. Sensing the tension in the room, Sophia descended the remaining stairs. Both men looked up at her entrance, Patrick's expression softening slightly. I'm sorry if we woke you, he said. I'm glad you're back safely, Sophia replied. All of you, Patrick nodded. Joe and the others are seeing to the horses. We've been riding most of the night. Mabel thrust a cup of coffee into his hands. Sit down before you fall down, Patrick Thompson. The cattle are gone, and running yourself into the ground won't bring them back. With obvious reluctance, Patrick took a seat. Now that Sophia could see him clearly, she noticed the exhaustion etched in his features. There was a smudge of dirt on his cheek and a small cut above one eyebrow. What happened? She asked, taking the cup of coffee Mabel offered her. Sheriff Hollister answered. We tracked the rustlers north toward the Platte River. Found evidence they'd crossed over, but the trail went cold after that. They know what they're doing, whoever they are. Any idea who might be responsible? Mabel asked. Patrick and the sheriff exchanged a look that Sophia couldn't quite interpret. We have suspicions, Patrick said carefully. There's a new outfit that's been buying up land to the north, the Gordon brothers. They've made no secret of wanting to expand further. But you have no proof they're involved, the sheriff added quickly. And without proof, my hands are tied. So we just wait for them to strike again. Patrick's frustration was palpable. I'll increase patrols in the area, Hollister promised, rising from his chair. And I'll send word to the marshals in Grand Island to be on the lookout for cattle with your brand. He placed his empty cup on the table. That's all I can do for now, Patrick. After the sheriff departed, Patrick sat heavily at the table, the weight of his disappointment evident in the slump of his shoulders. You should get some rest, Sophia suggested gently. Emma will be overjoyed to see you when she wakes. At the mention of his daughter, Patrick's expression lightened slightly. How was she while I was gone? Worried but brave, Sophia assured him. She had a dream about Caroline that unsettled her, but she slept through the night. Patrick nodded, his eyes softening. Thank you for taking care of her. He hesitated, then added, for taking care of both of us. The simple statement, laden with unspoken meaning, hung in the air between them. Sophia felt her heart quicken at the warmth in his gaze. You would do the same for me, she said softly. Yes, Patrick agreed. I would. The moment stretched between them, intimate despite Mabel's presence in the kitchen. Finally, Patrick stood, fatigue evident in his movements. I should clean up before Emma wakes. He moved toward the stairs, then paused beside Sophia. We'll talk later. The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Sophia nodded, understanding that he was referring to the conversation they had begun on the night of the harvest dance, the possibility of her becoming more than Emma's governess. Later, she agreed. True to Sophia's prediction, Emma was ecstatic when she discovered her father had returned. She barely left his side all morning, peppering him with questions about the rustlers and insisting on examining the small cut above his eyebrow. Did you have to shoot your gun, Pa? She asked as they sat at the breakfast table. No, Emma, Patrick replied patiently. We didn't catch the rustlers, so there was no shooting. Good, the child declared firmly. I don't want anyone to get shot, even bad men. Patrick smiled at his daughter's innocent moral certainty. That's my girl. After breakfast, despite his evident exhaustion, Patrick insisted on checking the remaining cattle and consulting with his ranch hands about increased security measures. Sophia watched from the porch as he rode out, Emma safely ensconced in front of him on the saddle. That man will work himself into an early grave if someone doesn't stop him, Mabel observed, coming to stand beside her. He feels responsible for everything and everyone, Sophia replied, understanding Patrick's drive all too well. It's part of who he is. Mabel snorted softly. It's who he became after Caroline died. Before, he knew how to rest, how to enjoy life's pleasures. She fixed Sophia with a pointed look. He needs reminding of that from time to time. Before Sophia could respond to this rather blatant hint, the sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. A sleek buggy was coming up the drive, pulled by a matched pair of glossy bay horses. Now who could that be? Mabel squinted at the approaching vehicle. Those aren't local horses. As the buggy drew nearer, Sophia felt a sickening jolt of recognition. The man holding the reins, impeccably dressed despite the dust of travel, was Charles Blackwood. Oh no, she breathed. Mabel glanced at her sharply. You know him. He's from Boston, an associate of my father's. Sophia's mind raced. What could Charles possibly want, coming all the way out to the ranch? The buggy pulled to a stop, and Charles descended with the practiced elegance of a man accustomed to making an impression. His tailored suit and polished boots looked absurdly out of place in the ranch yard. Miss Fairchild, he called, removing his hat with a flourish. What a delightful surprise to find you at home. Sophia moved to the edge of the porch, deliberately not inviting him up the steps. Mr. Blackwood, I confess I'm shocked to see you here. Are you really? His smile didn't reach his eyes. After our conversation at the dance, I thought it only proper to call on you formally. He glanced around the property with poorly disguised disdain. Though I must say, when they directed me to a cattle ranch, I began to wonder if there had been some mistake. No mistake, Sophia replied coolly. I am employed here as governess to Mr. Thompson's daughter. Charles's eyebrows rose. Employed? How? Enterprising of you. He stepped closer to the porch. But surely this is a temporary arrangement. I've come with news from Boston that might change your circumstances considerably. Mabel, sensing Sophia's discomfort, moved to stand beside her. Perhaps you should introduce your friend, Miss Fairchild. The reminder of propriety steadied Sophia. Of course. "Miss Johnston, this is Mr. Charles Blackwood of Boston. Mr. Blackwood, Miss Mabel Johnston, the housekeeper of Thompson Ranch." Charles acknowledged Mabel with a curt nod before returning his attention to Sophia. "Might we speak privately? The matter is of some delicacy." The last thing Sophia wanted was to be alone with Charles Blackwood, but curiosity about his news compelled her to nod. "We can speak in the garden. Miss Johnston, would you excuse us?" Mabel looked skeptical but retreated into the house, though Sophia suspected she would be watching from a window. The garden, Caroline's garden, as Sophia had come to think of it, was a peaceful spot with wooden benches placed among late blooming flowers. Sophia led Charles to the most visible bench, ensuring they could be seen from the house. "What news brings you all the way from Boston, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked without preamble. Charles studied her for a moment, as if assessing how best to proceed. "Your father has had a change of heart, Sophia. This was unexpected." "Has he? Indeed. The scandal has abated and he finds himself missing his only daughter." Charles adjusted his cuffs. "He has authorized me to bring you home with all forgiven. Your place in society can be restored, and we can put this unfortunate chapter behind us." Sophia stared at him, trying to reconcile this statement with the father who had so coldly dismissed her. "And what does my father expect in return for this sudden clemency?" "Only your return to the fold, so to speak, and perhaps," Charles paused delicately, "your consideration of a suitable match to fully restore the family's standing." "A match with you?" Sophia's directness seemed to surprise him. "I have always admired you, Sophia, even before this." "Lapse in judgment. Your father and I have discussed the possibility, and he is not opposed." The pieces fell into place with startling clarity. "I see. My father's business interests align with yours, and a marriage would solidify the partnership. How convenient." Charles's expression hardened slightly. "You always were too clever for your own good. But yes, there would be mutual benefits. Your father gains a respectable son-in-law and business ally. I gain a well-bred wife from a good family, and you." His gaze swept over her simple dress. "You escape this primitive existence and return to civilization." Sophia felt a strange calm settle over her. 6 months ago, such an offer might have tempted her not out of any affection for Charles Blackwood, but from a desperate desire to regain her place in the world she had known. Now, looking at his supercilious expression, she could only marvel at how completely her values had changed. "Mr. Blackwood," she said evenly, "please convey my regards to my father, but I must decline his offer." Charles's composure slipped momentarily. "You can't be serious." "Look around you, Sophia. This is no life for someone of your breeding, playing nursemaid to a rancher's brat. That's quite enough." Sophia rose from the bench, anger flaring at his disparagement of Emma. "I would thank you to speak respectfully of Mr. Thompson and his daughter. They have shown me more kindness and acceptance than I ever received in Boston society." Charles stood as well, his face flushing. "Kindness? Is that what you call it when a widower takes in a vulnerable young woman with nowhere else to go?" His voice took on a nasty edge. "Do you really think his interest is purely paternal, Sophia? Men like Thompson have certain needs, and an educated, attractive governess is a convenient way to fulfill them without the commitment of marriage." The crude insinuation struck Sophia like a physical blow. "How dare you?" she breathed. "You know nothing about Patrick Thompson or his character." "I know men," Charles countered, "especially men isolated on the frontier with few civilized outlets." He shook his head with mock sympathy. "Poor, naive Sophia, always seeing the best in people. Get out." The command came not from Sophia, but from behind them. Patrick stood at the garden entrance, his expression more dangerous than Sophia had ever seen it. Emma was nowhere in sight, likely whisked away by the vigilant Mabel when the confrontation began. "Mr. Thompson, I presume." Charles recovered quickly, extending his hand. "Charles Blackwood. I was just having a frank discussion with Miss Fairchild about her options." Patrick ignored the outstretched hand. "I heard exactly what kind of discussion you were having, Mr. Blackwood. And now I'm telling you to get off my property before I remove you myself." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Charles glanced between Patrick and Sophia, his earlier confidence visibly wavering. "Sophia, be reasonable," he attempted. "Your family, my family banished me," she interrupted, the pain of that rejection still raw despite her new life. "They cast me out without a backward glance because I damaged their precious reputation. And now they want me back, not out of love, but because it's convenient for business." She stepped closer to Patrick, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I've found people who value me for who I am, not for the social connections I bring. I've found a place where I belong." Charles's expression turned ugly. "So it's true then. You've fallen into the rancher's bed after all. Your father will be devastated to learn how completely you've disgraced yourself." Patrick moved so quickly that neither Sophia nor Charles had time to react. In one fluid motion, he seized the Bostonian by his expensive lapels and lifted him slightly off the ground. "You will apologize to Miss Fairchild," Patrick said, his voice deadly quiet, "and then you will leave my property and never return. Is that clear?" Charles, his face pale with fear, nodded jerkily. When Patrick released him, he stumbled back, straightening his jacket with shaking hands. "I apologize for the implication, Miss Fairchild," he managed. "It was uncalled for." "Yes, it was," Sophia agreed coldly. Charles retreated toward his buggy, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. "Your father will be informed of your decision," he said, a last attempt at dignity. "Don't expect another chance." "I wouldn't dream of it," Sophia replied. They watched in silence as Charles Blackwood climbed into his buggy and drove away, the dust from his departure hanging in the air like a lingering stain. When the vehicle was out of sight, Patrick turned to Sophia, concern replacing anger in his expression. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, surprised to find it was true. His words were ugly, but they held no power over me. Patrick searched her face as if looking for hidden distress. "You meant what you said, about finding a place where you belong." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "Every word." Something shifted in Patrick's eyes, relief, hope, and a deeper emotion that made Sophia's heart race. He took a step toward her, then stopped, uncertainty replacing his usual confidence. "Sophia, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." He drew a deep breath. "If there were no complications, no Emma to consider, no memories of Caroline, no difference in our backgrounds, would you have any interest in building a life with me?" The directness of the question took her breath away. For a moment, Sophia could only stare at him, this man who had become the center of her new world. "Patrick," she began, her voice soft but steady, "if there were no complications, my answer would still be the same. Emma is not a complication, she's a blessing I never expected. Your memories of Caroline are part of who you are, and I would never wish them away. As for our different backgrounds," she smiled slightly, "I've discovered I prefer the honest simplicity of Nebraska to the pretensions of Boston society." Hope blazed in Patrick's eyes. "You haven't actually answered my question," he pointed out gently. Sophia took a step closer to him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Yes, Patrick Thompson. I would very much like to build a life with you." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Patrick's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely tender. "I've wanted to do this since the day at the creek," he murmured, lowering his head slowly. giving her every opportunity to step away. But Sophia had no desire to retreat. Instead, she rose slightly on her toes, meeting him halfway as his lips found hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening with awakening passion. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Sophia Fairchild. I think I've loved you since the moment you saved Emma in the street. And I love you," she whispered back, "more than I thought possible." A delighted squeal from the direction of the house broke the moment. They turned to see Emma racing toward them, her face alight with joy. "Are you getting married?" she demanded, skidding to a stop before them. "Aunt Mabel said you might be if you stopped being stubborn, Pa." Patrick laughed, the sound rich and unfettered in a way Sophia had rarely heard. He knelt to Emma's level, drawing Sophia down beside him. "Would you like that, Emma? If Miss Fairchild became part of our family officially," the child nodded vigorously. "More than anything. Then she could stay forever and be my mother." She turned anxious eyes to Sophia. "You would stay forever, wouldn't you?" Sophia felt tears prick her eyes at the naked hope in Emma's face. "Forever and always, Emma, if that's what you and your father want." "It's what we both want very much," Patrick confirmed, his arm sliding around Sophia's waist. "But we should probably do things properly." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." From the pouch, he produced a ring, a simple gold band set with a modest diamond flanked by two smaller emeralds. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I had it sized in Kearney after the harvest dance." Sophia stared at the ring, then at Patrick's earnest face. "You've been planning this since then." "Longer," he admitted with a sheepish smile. "But that night, when I saw how that Boston fellow looked at you, I knew I couldn't risk waiting too long." His expression grew serious. "Sophia Fairchild, will you marry me? Will you be Emma's mother and my wife and make our family complete? Say yes," Emma urged, bouncing on her toes. Through tears of joy, Sophia nodded. "Yes, with all my heart, yes." As Patrick slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma threw her arms around both of them. Over the child's golden head, Sophia's eyes met Patrick's, and she saw in them the promise of a future brighter than any she had imagined possible when she first stepped off the stagecoach in Kearney. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a crisp October day when the prairie was ablaze with autumn colors. Reverend Miller performed the ceremony in the Kearney church, with Emma proudly serving as flower girl and Mabel dabbing suspiciously at her eyes throughout. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed. Even Sheriff Hollister abandoned his usual seriousness to lead a toast to the new Mrs. Thompson. "To Sophia," he declared, raising his glass, "who saved our Patrick from becoming a hermit and who makes the best apple pie this side of the Missouri River." Laughter and cheers echoed through the town hall, decorated with harvest bounty for the occasion. Sophia, radiant in a new dress of deep blue silk, accepted the good wishes of her new neighbors with genuine warmth. These people, plain-spoken, hard-working, and honest, had become her community in a way that Boston society never had. Patrick, handsome in a new suit, rarely left her side, his pride evident in every glance. And Emma, resplendent in white muslin with a crown of wildflowers in her hair, skipped between them with irrepressible joy. "Are you happy, Mrs. Thompson?" Patrick murmured as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Sophia looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." His arms tightened around her. "When you arrived in Kearney, I had no idea my life was about to change forever." "Nor I," Sophia admitted. "I thought I had lost everything when my family cast me out. I never imagined I would gain so much more." As the sun set over the Nebraska prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the new Thompson family drove home to their ranch. Emma, exhausted from the excitement, fell asleep between them on the wagon seat, her head resting trustingly on Sophia's lap. Looking down at the sleeping child, then up at the man who was now her husband, Sophia felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The journey from privileged Boston daughter to frontier wife and mother had been unexpected, but it had led her exactly where she was meant to be. That night, after Emma was tucked into bed with promises of pancakes for breakfast, Sophia and Patrick stood on the porch of their home, gazing at the star-filled Nebraska sky. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thompson," Patrick said softly, his arm around her waist. Sophia leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. "It feels like I've been home since the moment I arrived," she confessed, "as if my heart recognized where it belonged, even when my mind was still uncertain." Patrick turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I want you to know that I'll never take you for granted, Sophia. Every day with you and Emma is a gift I never expected to receive." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the beloved contours with gentle fingers. "We've both been given a second chance at happiness. I intend to cherish every moment of it." His kiss was a promise, sealed beneath the vast canopy of stars that had witnessed countless human hopes and dreams on the endless prairie. In the years that followed, the Thompson family thrived. Sophia's careful management of the household accounts, combined with Patrick's ranching expertise, allowed them to expand their operations. Within 3 years, Thompson Ranch had doubled in size, becoming one of the most prosperous in the county. Emma flourished under her new mother's guidance, developing into a confident, intelligent young lady with her father's green eyes and her birth mother's musical talents. Sophia taught her to play the piano, and the house was often filled with the sound of their duets. And when, in the spring of 1877, Sophia gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Caroline, Emma took to her role as big sister with characteristic enthusiasm. "My family just got bigger," Patrick had announced proudly in the Kearney general store, handing out cigars to everyone present. "Poor Cowboy Dad," Joe Bailey had joked. "2 babies at once, you'll never sleep again." But Patrick's joy couldn't be dimmed. His family, once broken by loss, had been made whole again and then expanded beyond his wildest dreams. On the twins' first birthday, as they sat on a blanket in Caroline's garden, Patrick watched his wife gently helping Samuel stand on wobbly legs. "Did you ever think, when you first came to Kearney, that this would be your life?" he asked. Sophia looked up at him, then at their children, Emma helping little Caroline smell a flower, Samuel gripping her fingers as he attempted his first steps, and her heart swelled with gratitude. "Never," she admitted, "but now I can't imagine any other life or any other family." Patrick's smile was tender as he leaned down to kiss her. "Neither can I, my love, neither can I." And as the Nebraska sun bathed them in its golden light, Sophia Fairchild Thompson knew with absolute certainty that her family's rejection had not been an ending, but a beginning, the first step on a journey that had led her home.